Marcus stood at the edge of the crowded wedding venue, his eyes scanning the crowd, but his mind was miles away. He was supposed to be celebrating with Ebony, the woman he loved, but something felt off. The laughter around him sounded distant, the conversations faded into white noise. A storm was brewing inside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something deep in his gut that whispered there was a secret Ebony had been hiding from him. He had always trusted her. They shared everything, or so he thought. But now, doubt gnawed at him, threatening to tear apart the happiness he had built. It wasn't like Ebony to keep things from him. At least, that's what he wanted to believe. As he glanced at her from across the room, her radiant smile and easy grace only made his suspicions grow stronger. Ebony had always been the light of his life, the one person who could calm his storms, the one who knew him better than anyone else. But tonight she seemed different, distant, almost as if she was keeping herself locked behind a wall he couldn't break through. What was she hiding? He couldn't focus on anything else. His thoughts raced back to the moment when he first noticed her strange behavior, the way she had avoided his questions about a business trip she had taken weeks ago, the sudden change in her routine, and the fact that she had been spending more time with a certain man, someone he had never seen before, someone whose name she barely mentioned. It all felt like a puzzle with a missing piece, and Marcus couldn't ignore the fact that the more he tried to push his doubts aside, the clearer they became. This wasn't just about his insecurities. Something was going on, and he needed to know what. He excused himself from the crowd and made his way toward the back of the venue. His mind was spinning. He had to confront her. He had to find out what was really going on. There was no going back now. He couldn't continue pretending everything was fine when he felt like he was on the edge of losing everything. As he reached the private room where he knew she'd be, his heart raced. Was he overreacting? Or was this the moment when everything changed? He pushed open the door and found Ebony standing by the window, her back turned to him. She didn't hear him enter. For a moment he stood there, watching her, waiting for the right words to come. But all he could think was one question. What was she hiding? The tension in the air thickened, and as Marcus took a step forward, Ebony slowly turned around, her eyes locking with his. There was no going back now. What she said next would change everything, and Ebony's eyes met Marcus's with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. She stood there, frozen for a moment, as if she had been caught in a web of her own making. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The smile she had worn all evening was gone, replaced by a look he couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear, guilt, or something else? For a brief second, it felt like time stood still. The sounds of the wedding faded away, and all that remained was the heavy silence between them. Marcus took a step closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Ebony, what's going on? What have you been hiding from me?" She seemed to flinch, her eyes darting to the side, as if searching for an escape. But there was no easy way out. The room was small, the walls closing in, and the truth seemed to loom over them like a dark cloud. She started, her voice faltering. "Marcus, you don't understand. I never wanted you to find out this way." Marcus's mind raced. Find out what? What is it, Ebony? His voice was sharp now, his patience running thin. "You've been acting so strange. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the weird trips. What is all of this?" Ebony looked away, her face a mixture of guilt and frustration. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose you." The weight of her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Lose him? But they were supposed to be a team. They had always been there for each other. What could possibly be so bad that it would make her fear losing him? "I don't understand," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "What are you talking about?" Ebony took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Marcus, there's someone I've been talking to. Someone from my past. Before I met you." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue, but the tension in the air was too thick to ignore. "I didn't want to keep secrets from you, but I didn't know how to explain it. It's not what you think." Marcus's mind spun. Someone from her past. His heart began to race again, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Who is it? What do you mean, it's not what I think?" Ebony closed her eyes, gathering her thoughts. "His name is Elijah. We were close once. I never wanted to bring him into our lives, but he's been trying to get back in touch with me for months. I didn't want to hurt you, Marcus. I thought I could ignore it, move on. But it's been so hard. He knows things about me, things that you don't know." Marcus's blood ran cold. Elijah! That name felt like a punch. He'd never heard her mention anyone named Elijah, but the way Ebony spoke, the way she seemed to shrink in on herself, made his stomach twist. What kind of connection did they share? And why had she kept it from him? 1,000 questions flooded his mind, but there was only one thing he knew for sure. There was so much more to this story than she was letting on. Something was being kept in the dark. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with both hurt and anger. "Why keep this a secret? What are you hiding?" Ebony looked at him, her face pale, her lips trembling. "I was afraid, Marcus. Afraid of what you might think. Afraid of losing you." The words hung in the air, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. There had to be more. Why had this Elijah been so persistent? What did he want from her? And why did he seem to have such a hold on her, even now? As Marcus stood there, staring at Ebony, the mystery deepened. The answers he had been desperately searching for seemed just out of reach, and the more he heard, the less certain he became. Was he losing her? Or was there something much darker at play? Before Marcus could say another word, Ebony stepped back, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I never wanted this to happen. But Elijah is here. He's in town." And with that, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. The words hit Marcus like a hammer. "Elijah is here." His heart raced. The ground beneath his feet suddenly felt unstable. His mind was a storm of confusion and anger. Why hadn't she told him this sooner? Why now, at the worst possible time? The wedding, their future, all of it suddenly seemed like a fragile illusion. "I don't understand," Marcus muttered, his voice hoarse. "Why now, Ebony? Why couldn't you have told me about him before? What does he want?" Ebony looked like she wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat. She shook her head, her eyes welling up. "It's not what you think, Marcus. Elijah. He's not just some random guy from my past. He's complicated. He's not someone I can just erase. He's been a part of my life, even if I didn't want him to be." Marcus clenched his fists, trying to keep his voice steady. "If he's that important to you, then why am I just hearing about him now? Why keep him a secret? What's really going on?" Her silence only deepened his frustration. Every question he asked seemed to push her further away, like she was retreating behind some invisible barrier. He needed answers, but it was becoming clearer that they were buried under layers of unspoken truth. "Marcus, please, just trust me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This isn't easy for me. You don't know everything about my past. Elijah. He's someone I never wanted you to meet. Not because of him, but because of what it might do to us." The weight of her words hung in the air. What could she possibly mean? What had Elijah done that was so bad, so dangerous, that it threatened the foundation of their relationship? Marcus's mind flashed back to moments in their relationship that now seemed different, darker. The strange way she had avoided answering his questions about her family or past relationships. The trips she had taken without him, the long hours she spent on her phone, her sudden defensiveness when he asked about certain things. It was all starting to make sense in the worst possible way. "Are you still involved with him?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with both fear and disbelief. "Is that why you've been so distant? Why you've been hiding things?" Ebony's face tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought she might break down. But instead she stepped closer to him, taking his hands in hers, her grip trembling. "No, Marcus. It's not like that. I swear to you, I'm not with him anymore. But there are things I can't explain. Things I don't know how to fix." She looked down, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy for her to carry. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He wanted to believe her, to trust that she wasn't hiding something worse. But the nagging doubt in his mind wouldn't go away. If she wasn't involved with Elijah, then why was he back in the picture? And why had she kept him such a closely guarded secret? The silence between them stretched out, thick and suffocating. Marcus's head pounded, his heart thumping in his ears. He could feel the walls closing in, the pressure building. He didn't know what to do anymore. Every answer felt like it led to more questions. And just as the tension seemed unbearable, a knock on the door shattered the silence. Both of them jumped. Ebony's face drained of color, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. She looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. "It's him, Marcus. It's Elijah." The door creaked open before he could say anything, and standing there, framed in the doorway, was a man with a presence so powerful it made Marcus's stomach twist. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto Ebony with a possessiveness that sent a wave of cold dread through him. "Ebony." Elijah's voice was low, smooth, and full of authority. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were being sized up, like you were nothing more than a pawn in his game. "I knew I'd find you here." Marcus's fists clenched involuntarily. The man had no idea who he was dealing with. He wanted to step forward to confront Elijah, but the air between them seemed charged with something he couldn't quite understand. The tension was palpable, and Marcus had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would turn their world upside down. Ebony's eyes darted between the two men, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "Elijah, please. I didn't want you to come here." Elijah's smile never wavered. "Too late for that, Ebony. You can't run from the past forever." And as for him, he glanced at Marcus, his gaze hardening. "Well, I think we both know that things are never going to be the same again." Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He could feel the stakes rising with every word, every glance. He wasn't sure what Elijah wanted, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just some past relationship he was trying to dig up. This was a war, and Marcus had just stepped into the middle of it. Marcus felt a chill sweep through the room, colder than the air outside. Elijah's words lingered like a dark cloud, suffocating everything in its path. His eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that seemed to burn through him. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus finally managed to ask, his voice steady but his fists clenched at his sides. Every muscle in his body was tense, his instincts screaming to protect what was his. But what exactly was his? Ebony was slipping through his fingers, her distance from him growing with each passing moment. Elijah tilted his head, a slow, mocking smile curling on his lips. "I think you know exactly who I am, Marcus. I'm someone who knows Ebony in ways you can't even imagine." His gaze flickered briefly to Ebony, who stood frozen, her lips parted as though she were caught between running and staying. Ebony opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence in the room was deafening, and Marcus's mind raced. What did Elijah mean? He had never been so sure of anything in his life. He had to know what the hell was going on. He couldn't just stand there and let this man waltz into their lives, making cryptic threats and playing mind games. "Stop it, Elijah," Ebony finally whispered, her voice barely audible. She stepped between Marcus and Elijah, as though trying to shield Marcus from whatever storm Elijah had brought with him. "This isn't the time for your games. You don't get to play with our lives like this." But Elijah didn't back down. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence dominating the room. He didn't even look at Ebony anymore. His eyes were locked on Marcus, measuring him up. "I'm not playing games, Ebony. This man, he's too late. He doesn't understand the bigger picture. He doesn't know what's at stake." Marcus felt his blood run cold. What did Elijah mean by that? Was this more than just some old relationship? Had he been involved in something darker, something dangerous? "You don't know anything about me, or us," Marcus shot back, his voice now rising with anger. "You're just some ghost from the past, trying to stir up trouble. Whatever this is, it ends now." Elijah chuckled darkly, and it made Marcus's stomach churn. "Oh, I know a lot more than you think. This isn't just about you, Marcus. This is about something much bigger, something you're not even prepared for." Marcus's mind reeled. He couldn't understand. Everything about this felt wrong. Why was Elijah so confident? Why was he playing with their lives like this, weaving a story that didn't make sense? And why was Ebony so silent? Why wasn't she telling him everything? Ebony finally turned to Marcus, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. But please, promise me you won't react the way you're thinking. Just listen." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment when everything was supposed to come to light. His chest tightened, his mind racing with a million possibilities. Whatever she was about to say, he knew it would change everything. "I'm listening," he said, his voice strained as he stepped closer to her. But before she could speak, Elijah cut in, his tone sharp. "No, don't listen to her, Marcus. She's trying to protect you, but you're already too deep in. This is bigger than you two." He took a step forward, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. "You have no idea what you're getting into. You think you know her, but you don't. You don't know the truth about what she's been hiding, or who she's really been involved with." Marcus felt a surge of anger, but there was also a nagging fear gnawing at him. What truth was Elijah talking about? What had Ebony been hiding? The more Elijah spoke, the more Marcus felt like he was slipping further away from the woman he thought he knew. "You're lying," Marcus shot back, his voice low and threatening. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not afraid of you." Elijah smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. "We'll see about that. But know this, Marcus, you're already in the middle of a war. You just don't know it yet." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Marcus's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle that Elijah was slowly revealing. The more he tried to understand, the less clear things became. Everything was murky now. Ebony's past, Elijah's involvement, their relationship. It was all tangled in lies, secrets and half-truths. "I'm not afraid of you, Elijah," Marcus repeated, though this time there was a crack in his voice. But before either man could speak, the room seemed to shudder. There was a sound, something from outside the room. A knock at the door. A voice calling from the hallway. Ebony's face turned ashen. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "Not now. Not this." The tension in the room reached its breaking point. Whatever was about to happen next, whatever secret Elijah had been hinting at, whatever lie had been hidden for so long, it was all about to come crashing down. And Marcus knew, deep in his gut, that once the door opened, everything would change. There would be no turning back. The knock on the door sent a jolt through Marcus. It wasn't just a simple interruption. It felt like a warning, a signal that everything was about to shift into something far more dangerous. Ebony's face went white, her body rigid with panic. "Please," she whispered, her eyes pleading with Marcus as if asking him to understand without saying a word. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what was happening. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on him. He wanted to demand answers, to force the truth out of her, but something in her expression told him that this moment, this exact moment, was going to change everything. The door creaked open slowly, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what he expected, but it definitely wasn't what he saw. Standing there wasn't just Elijah. No, this time it was someone else. Someone he hadn't expected. Someone he didn't even recognize at first. A man in a dark suit, with a calm, measured demeanor that felt out of place in the chaos of the room, stood at the threshold. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and cold, as though he knew exactly what was about to unfold. And he wasn't here for small talk. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows that made the man appear even more imposing. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had never seen this man before, but his presence felt dangerous, like a storm that had been gathering in the distance, ready to strike. "Mr. Johnson," the man said, his voice smooth and authoritative, "I'm glad you could join us. I wasn't sure you'd be ready for the truth, but now that you're here, I suppose we have no choice but to proceed." The room seemed to tilt. Truth. What was this man talking about? Marcus looked at Ebony, who now appeared even more fragile than before. She had been keeping something from him, something far worse than he had imagined. This wasn't just about her past with Elijah. There was more, much more, and Marcus was standing right in the middle of it. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising with frustration. His fists were still clenched, but now they felt like they were fighting a battle against an invisible force. "What do you want with Ebony? And why the hell are you here?" The man didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto Marcus's with an unsettling calmness. "My name is Victor Cross, and I'm here because of what you don't know, about who Ebony really is, about what she's been involved with, and most importantly, about what's coming next." Marcus's mind spun. He had heard the name before, but he couldn't place it. Victor Cross. Was this another person from Ebony's past? Was he some kind of former lover, or was he something even darker? Ebony stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Victor, please. Not now. Not here." But Victor didn't listen. "I'm afraid there's no more time to waste, Ebony. Marcus has already been dragged into something he doesn't understand. Whether he's ready or not, the game has begun." A cold sweat broke out on Marcus's forehead. "What game? What the hell are you talking about?" His pulse raced as his gaze shifted from Victor to Ebony, trying to make sense of it all. Victor's eyes narrowed. "This game, Marcus, is bigger than both of you. It's about power, control, and secrets that could destroy everything. You see, Ebony is not just some ordinary woman. She's tangled up in something much darker than you can imagine. Marcus felt like the floor was slipping out from under him. Ebony? Part of something darker? His mind raced. He had known there was more to her than met the eye, but this was something else entirely. Ebony's face crumpled with guilt, her shoulders sagging as if she were finally giving in to something she had been fighting. Marcus, I didn't want you to find out this way. But the truth is, I'm not just a woman who had a history with Elijah. There's more. I've been part of something dangerous. And now I can't get out. Marcus's stomach twisted. Every instinct told him to run, to get away from all of this madness, but something held him there, rooted to the spot. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Victor stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with something that was almost pitying. "She's involved in a network, Marcus. A network of people who control everything behind the scenes, businesses, politics, the underground world. And Elijah, he's just one of the pieces. He's been trying to use Ebony as leverage to get to the bigger players." Marcus felt as though the room was spinning. This couldn't be true. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But Victor's cold demeanor, the look in Ebony's eyes, it all pointed to something far more terrifying than he could have imagined. "And now," Victor continued, his voice lowering as he leaned in closer, "you're both caught in the middle of it. Whether you like it or not, Marcus, you're part of the game now. You've been marked." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, his thoughts jumbled. He had never signed up for any of this. He was just a man who wanted to be with the woman he loved. But now, everything was on the line. "You can't just walk away from this, Marcus," Victor said, as if reading his mind. "The moment you let yourself get close to Ebony, you became a part of this world. And there's no going back." The tension in the room reached its breaking point. Marcus's eyes locked with Ebony's, and for the first time he saw the truth in her eyes. The fear, the guilt, the helplessness. Whatever Victor was talking about, it was real, and it was bigger than anything he could ever have imagined. Marcus felt the weight of Victor's words crushing down on him. The room, once filled with confusion and fear, now felt suffocatingly small, as if it were closing in around him. He turned to Ebony, his mind racing. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. This wasn't just a relationship anymore. This was a battle for survival, a tangled mess of lies, power, and secrets. And somehow he had been pulled into the eye of the storm. "Is this true?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse, barely able to conceal the shock and anger boiling inside him. "Are you really part of this network? This world?" Ebony didn't answer at first. She seemed to shrink back from his gaze, her shoulders hunched, her eyes filled with regret. The weight of her silence was heavier than any words she could say. "Ebony, please," Marcus pressed, his voice breaking. "Just tell me the truth. I need to know if I've been living a lie." Her lips trembled, and then, as if the walls around her finally crumbled, she spoke. "I never wanted this for you, Marcus. I never wanted you to know. But yes, it's true. I was part of it, part of a network I didn't choose. They control everything, Marcus. Money, power, influence. And I thought I could escape, thought I could leave it behind. But it's not that simple. I got in too deep." Victor's smile was cold, almost smug. "She's telling you the truth, Marcus. I warned you this wouldn't be easy." The world she's tangled in is dangerous. Far more dangerous than you can imagine. You think you can protect her? You think you can keep her away from this?" Marcus's chest tightened, but he couldn't look away from Ebony. He had to believe her. Everything inside him screamed that this wasn't the woman who had deceived him. She was a victim, just like him. The truth had been buried under layers of fear, and now it was clawing its way to the surface. "What happened, Ebony?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but intense. "How did it all start?" She took a shaky breath. "It started before I met you. I got involved with the wrong people. It was a mistake, Marcus. But Elijah, he's one of them. And he was always the one who tried to pull me back in. I thought I could outrun it, but Victor was right. There's no escape once you're in." Victor stepped forward, cutting her off. "And now it's time for you both to understand. There's no going back. Not for you, not for her. We've come too far. If we let her walk away, it's over. Everything she's worked for, everything she's built, it all crumbles." Marcus's heart raced as Victor's words sank in. He could feel the weight of it all, like an invisible chain wrapping around his neck. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about survival. But who was Marcus really fighting for? Ebony? Or himself? Before he could respond, there was a sudden shift in the room. The door slammed open, and in rushed another figure, one Marcus never expected. A woman, her face familiar yet distant, stood in the doorway. She was tall, confident, her eyes sharp with purpose. It was someone he had seen before, but he hadn't recognized her until now. Elijah's other accomplice, the one who had always been in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes. "Elijah, Victor, step aside," the woman said, her voice commanding. "It's time to end this." Marcus's head spun. Who was this woman? Why had she come now? Was she another player in this dangerous game? Victor and Elijah exchanged uneasy glances, but they didn't challenge her. There was something in her presence, something cold, calculated, that made them hesitate. The woman turned to Marcus, her eyes locking onto his with a piercing gaze. "Marcus, you've been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that's about to change. Ebony's not the only one with secrets. And you're about to learn something that will turn everything you think you know on its head." Marcus took a step back, his mind reeling. Another twist. What could she possibly mean by that? He was already tangled in a web of lies, deceit, and dangerous players. How much worse could it get? The woman smiled, a slow, chilling smile. "The truth is, Marcus, Ebony's not just caught in a network. She is the network, the real power. Elijah and Victor, they were just pawns in her game all along." Marcus's knees nearly buckled. His breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words settled over him like a heavy fog. Ebony, the quiet woman he had loved, the one who had seemed so fragile, had been the mastermind behind everything. The very thing he had feared all along had been true. He had been played. Elijah looked as stunned as Marcus felt. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but the woman didn't answer. She simply turned her gaze back to Marcus, her expression unreadable. "You see, Marcus," she said, her voice now low and steady, "Ebony isn't running from this world. She's been building it. And now that you're involved, there's no way out for either of you." Everything Marcus thought he knew about his life, his love for Ebony, it had all been a lie. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had believed in, had been pulling the strings all along. The game wasn't just about survival. It was about control. And now, with the final pieces in place, Marcus had no choice but to accept the truth. Ebony was the one in control. And the question now was, what would she do with that power? The woman's cold smile remained, as the room seemed to close in, and Marcus was left with only one thing to consider. How far was he willing to go in this game? Marcus stood frozen, the weight of the woman's revelation pressing down on him. The world around him seemed to spin, his mind struggling to grasp what she had just said. Ebony had been the one pulling the strings all along? How could this be true? How could the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, be the very mastermind behind everything that had happened? He turned to Ebony, his eyes searching hers for an explanation, something, anything, that could make sense of this chaos. But her face was unreadable, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else he couldn't quite place. There was no warmth there any more, no tenderness, just the cold, hard truth that everything he had believed in was nothing but a facade. "Ebony," he whispered, his voice breaking, "why? Why did you do this?" She looked at him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I never wanted you to be a part of this, Marcus. I never wanted you to know. But you couldn't stay out of it forever. The moment I let you in, I knew this would happen." Victor, who had been standing silently in the background, stepped forward. "She never meant to drag you into this, Marcus. But you were too close to her. The moment you became involved, you became part of the game." Marcus's head was spinning. This was more than just a relationship gone wrong. This was a conspiracy, a game of power, control, and manipulation, and he had been a pawn in it all along. His fists clenched, and for a moment he felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had given everything to Ebony, and now he realized she had been playing him the entire time. "Are you going to kill me, too?" Marcus spat, his voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Is that what all of this has been leading to?" Ebony shook her head quickly. "No, Marcus. This isn't about that. It was never about hurting you. It was always about survival. The network I'm involved in, it's not something you can just walk away from. Once you're in for life." The woman who had stood silently by now spoke again, her voice smooth and calm. "And that's why it's time for Marcus to make a choice. He can walk away, and everything will remain the same. Or he can stay, and become part of what's to come. But the truth is, Marcus, you can never go back to the life you had before." The words hung in the air, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. There was no easy answer. His mind raced, but deep down, he knew that whatever decision he made would change the course of his life forever. Ebony had been the anchor he thought he could hold on to, but now she was a part of something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He turned to her one last time, his voice shaking. "I loved you, Ebony. I trusted you with everything I had. And now, I don't even know who you are anymore." Her face twisted in pain, but she didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Everything had been said. The truth had been laid bare. Marcus knew what he had to do. With a final, broken look at Ebony, he turned away, walking toward the door. The woman in the suit watched him with cold eyes, but Marcus didn't care anymore. He had made his choice. He had to walk away from this world, this game, and find a way to rebuild his life, no matter how impossible it seemed. As he stepped out of the room, the weight of the past few hours heavy on his shoulders, Marcus realized that the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was accepting the fact that the person he had loved had never really been the person he thought she was. And that truth would stay with him forever. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap, grounding him in reality. He was free. For now. But as he walked into the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't truly out of the game. No one ever really walks away from something like this. But maybe, just maybe, that was a story for another day.